Time for another Dashing Game Sporting Adventures episode. And with the Super Bowl just a week away, and arguably the two best teams of the year, although some might say Detroit a bit unlucky not to be there. But then again, they'd set their season up and they lost their first playoff match, and it'd be disappointing for Detroit, who've waited a long time to get an opportunity to play in the Super Bowl. But it's still been a very, very good season for Detroit. It's Philadelphia and the Kansas City Chiefs, who are going for three in a row under the great Andy Reid. It took a long time to win one, but since he's won one, he's now managed to win three, and it might be four come next week. We're here, of course, for KISS Professional Solutions, and KISS, of course, are the largest independent provider of copiers and printers in Victoria. You can get them on 1300 KISS PS 547777 or www.kissps.com.au. And it's a great pleasure joining me, a man that I got to know in a previous job that I had at Eon Sports. It was a short-lived job, which I loved, but unfortunately it didn't last all that long. But one of my key contributors every week, teaching me a lot about the NFL, was a young man who loves the sport. He was heavily involved in it on a work basis. He now just follows it as a very keen fan. He follows the Indianapolis Colts, but we won't hold that against him. I follow the Dallas Cowboys, and please don't hold that against me. It's a great pleasure to welcome. I've never officially met him, never officially seen him, but spoken to him many times. Josh Nye. Josh, welcome to the program. Great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, and good to finally put a face to the name and emerge from the shadows. It's a good opportunity to chat about a very big game next week with two big teams that you mentioned the top.
Are they the best two teams left, do you reckon?
I think so. You mentioned the Detroit Lions, and look, they had a fantastic season. They've had a fantastic run since they landed that massive trade for Jared Goff and a few different extra draft picks in letting go of Matt Stafford. But they were just a little bit unlucky. They ended up with 16 players on their injured reserve list, which, that's enough to field an entire offense or defense and still have some room left over for depth. So you're missing about a third of your roster there on IR, and they're key players, especially on defense. And unfortunately, just ran into a juggernaut in Washington in that playoff game. And I think it's a kind of a missed opportunity for Detroit, because they are probably one of the better teams in the league, but we've seen it time and time again. You're just trying to be consistent in the playoffs is an incredibly hard thing to do. And I guess that's kind of what makes this Chiefs team so special.
Was Dan Campbell too hard on himself when he said he didn't have them prepared? I mean, that's not right, is it? I mean, there's so many coaches involved in a professional NFL team, Josh, nowadays, that they would have had him, or he would have had them prepared, no doubt, and they had the extra week off as well to prepare for the match.
Yeah, definitely. I think he probably was a little bit too honest, but I think that's kind of endearing, and kind of, if you've been following the Lions and Dan Campbell, his hire was kind of laughed at to begin with as a coach, because he was such a very emotional, hardline coach, and he talked about instilling this mentality, and he kind of lives and breathes it. And I think the team around him respects that, and respects that accountability and care and love. And I think he just, instead of putting it on other people, I think he takes all that accountability himself and takes it on his chin. And they're going to have a hard season next year, because, while they get all those players back and they're going to be healthy and they've been drafting really well in the last couple of years, him and the GM are really well aligned and on the same page, and have that hard-nosed sort of mentality on how to build a roster and how to play with that roster. They've lost their offensive coordinator and their defensive coordinator to coaching hires. So, it's consistency so hard in this league, and that's, again, the Chiefs just being a juggernaut for so long, and the Patriots back in the day as well. It's so hard to be sustained greatness. So I think Dan Campbell was probably too harsh, but I think that's probably going to put them in good stead for next season, because I think the team's going to really rally around that and take on his mentality heading into next season.
Is that a positive, Josh, that your offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator, such important parts of the coaching staff of an NFL team or an American football team, are seen to be good enough to become head coaches of other franchises in the competition? I mean, they would see that as a feather in their cap, would they not?
Yeah, I think it's a positive. It's also a negative, because then you lose those. It's a double-edged sword, really, and we see it so often in the NFL, where a team will have a great couple of seasons, and then their offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator get poached, and they kind of take a step back. And sometimes these coaches don't quite work out as head coaches, that they're maybe more suited to being coordinators. And we kind of see that in the two defensive coordinators in the Super Bowl, in Vic Fangio and Steve Spagnuolo. They probably didn't work out as head coaches, but they're very elite defensive coordinators. And that might be the case with these Lions coaches, but at the end of the day, the Lions aren't going to have them next season, and they may eventually come back if they fail as head coaches elsewhere. But finding that next man up now in the team and to replace them is hard. But you've got a veteran quarterback like Jared Goff, who's probably learned a lot in the last couple of seasons with Ben Johnson, so he can probably take a lot of what he's learned and keep it and instill it in their offense. Defense is a lot different. It'll depend on personnel. So it's a big loss, double-edged sword, and we see it happen all the time where teams lose their coordinators and then they kind of, those 2-3 games that impact, you lose, you're suddenly, you're not an 11-win team, you're an 8 or 9-win team, and that's the difference between making the playoffs and missing the playoffs.
Is Dan Campbell at times a bit too aggressive with his calls during games, do you think? Or is that just him?
I like it. I think when you look at the math, like trying to win a coin toss in overtime and then you got to make a stop, all those percentages add up. So I think going for it, especially when you back your team and you back your players, and I think it depends on the players that you have. If you don't have a great quarterback or you're more of a defensive-minded team, then punting the ball back to the other team's not the worst thing. But when you have a good offense like they do and a good offensive line and things like that, I think going for it's fine. You're backing yourself. You're showing your team that you believe in them. So I think it kind of hurt them in the opposite way, in that they're so good at being aggressive and going for it that the Washington Commanders kind of played the Lions game against them, and they just ran into a juggernaut in that game. And Washington repeatedly went for it on fourth down, repeatedly made it, didn't settle for field goals, were very aggressive, and they scored 40-something points. So I know the proof's in the pudding, I guess, if you have the personnel and the players to consistently pick up 1 or 2 yards you need to reset the chains and keep the ball rolling. I think doing it's fine.
For the uninitiated, and I'm probably one of those still learning the sport and still learning the code, what would you describe as an aggressive play by the coach, Josh?
Oh, there's times I think in that game against the Commanders, they went for it in their own half. I think it was 4th and 5, their own 40. It's a pretty aggressive call.
Yeah.
10, 15 years ago, I think Bill Belichick famously went for it against the Colts, my beloved Colts, at 4th and 2, because he didn't want to put the ball back in Peyton Manning's hand with the chance to win the game. So Washington were marching down the field. So Dan Campbell said, you know what, we can't punt this ball back to the team because they're dangerous, they're scoring. We're going to go for it on 4th down and try and score points. They did pick it up, but I think a couple of plays later, unfortunately, Jared Goff threw an interception. But they're kind of the aggressive plays that we've seen from Dan Campbell, going for it on 4th down in your own territory and things like that, where does backfire at times, but I think more often than not with the Lions, and we've seen it now with the Commanders as well, it's actually paying dividends because your best players, your quarterbacks, are on the field making plays, and they're more likely to score. And it's an offensive league that the league's set up for offense to thrive. So I think it's not the worst idea.
We're with NFL expert for Dashing Dan's Sporting Adventures, thanks to KISS Professional Solutions, the largest independent provider of copiers and printers in Victoria, with a large or small business in Melbourne, Sydney, Gippsland, Shepparton and Albury that also cater for businesses and offices in Wagga. They offer business phone systems, NBN services, CCTV and also security systems, and they're based in Carrum Downs in southeast Victoria themselves. They take pride in going the extra mile for their customers, aiming to retain them for life. Before we look at the Super Bowl in detail between the Eagles, who are magnificent in disposing of the Commanders, and also the Chiefs, who just know how to win, it was a narrow win, maybe a controversial win over the Bills. We've been talking about coaches. There's a number of new ones.
Yep.
I'll start with Dallas because it's always a big story. They're the team that, unless you follow Dallas, it's the team that everyone loves to hate. They've gone for an inexperienced coach. When I say inexperienced head coach, he's had 27 years coaching experience, including the last few on the coaching roster at Dallas, in Brad Schottenheimer, as a rookie head coach to replace Mike McCarthy. Firstly, is McCarthy unlucky? If it was any other franchise, would have he kept his job with a 7-10 record after playoffs, despite losing the first week in the previous 2 years? And The second part of the question, is Schottenheimer the right hire?
Okay. Firstly, I think Mike McCarthy leaving Dallas was the right call. I think, look, he's a good head coach. He's not a great head coach. His one Super Bowl win was largely attributed to the excellent play of Aaron Rodgers. So I think Mike McCarthy on name value is probably a little bit overrated, but I also think sometimes he's a little bit underrated in that he is a calming presence. He is a very good play caller. He's a solid coach that can win you 10 games or 12 games as we saw. But I think getting over the hump and going on a playoff run and beating a team like Detroit or Philadelphia in the playoffs, I think you need someone that's a little bit more aggressive. We just talked about being aggressive. He's a very conservative play caller at times and can coach a little bit scared from time to time. So I think getting over that hump and finding a better head coach is probably the way to do it. It's a tough one. Like when you sack a coach like that, you have to ask the question: is the coach that I'm going to hire, does he have a better chance of being better than Mike McCarthy? And so to transition into your second question, I don't think Brian Schottenheimer has a better chance of being Mike McCarthy or being better than Mike McCarthy. So he's had 12 years as an offensive play caller in the NFL. Only 4 times as an offense he's been the play caller finished inside the top 10 in points per game, or only 3 times out of 12 in the top half of the league. So he's not an elite play caller by any means. He's not a really hot name as an offensive coordinator. He's not really doing anything special like Ben Johnson or Liam Cohen, the new Jaguars head coach, who's done wonders with Baker Mayfield and the Bucs over the last couple of years. So I just think it's a very sort of milquetoast hire, very just down the line. It's just I don't understand the hire at all. I don't know. I can't really throw out any huge names other than sort of Ben Johnson or Aaron Glenn, the 2 Lions coordinators that we just mentioned that could have been better hires, and obviously they've gone to other landing spots. So maybe Dallas just couldn't rein in their man, and they had to settle for Shoddy. But someone like Kellen Moore, who's the offensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles, is still out there at the moment. So I think the New Orleans Saints are patiently waiting for him. So I just think that's probably a better hire than Schottenheimer.
Do you think Schottenheimer's been appointed because we know how much power the Jones have got? Jerry Jones has been owner of this team forever. His son's heavily involved as well, that they can have still complete control. And has that continued to be an issue for Dallas since they had that wonderful period in the 90s?
Yeah, it's very eminent. It's very sort of puppety type thing. Someone they control and you can manipulate. And the Jones family, they're very sort of a lot of nepotism in Dallas. His son is in GM, and there's a lot of family value. I mean, there's nepotism galore in the NFL. We see it time and time again. If your surname Shanahan or or anything like that, you're going to end up, if you've been in the same room as Sean McVay, you're going to end up getting a coaching job at some point. But it's definitely reeks of someone that isn't. Maybe Ben Johnson wasn't the right fit because he might have, not bent over for Jerry or made the right call or moved aside to sort of let the Dallas power brokers be. And, there's some long-suffering Dallas Cowboy fans out there that I'm very close with. One in particular works for ESPN Australia and Laurie Horish, and we've had many of the chats over the years, and his frustrations are growing sort of more and more by the season. He'd really like Jerry Jones to step aside and relinquish some power and to try and take Dallas back to the promised land, because Dak Prescott is a good quarterback, and I think he can be a great quarterback with the right coach. Not even close. Someone like an Andy Reid to come in and mold an offense around Dak Prescott's strengths is what you need. And maybe Shoddy will do that, but I don't have a huge amount of confidence in it.
The other new coaches, we've touched on Ben Johnson. I've got a feeling you're a huge rat for him. He's gone to Chicago. Aaron Glenn, of course, was part of Detroit's coaching team, has gone to the New York Jets. Mike Vrabel, of course, an outstanding player in his own right, won a couple of Super Bowls as a player with New England, has gone to New England as their head coach. Liam Cohen at Jacksonville was seen as an interesting appointment as well. And as you say, New Orleans just waiting, and they think they might get the man in charge of offensive coordination at Philadelphia when the Super Bowl ends next week. Is Ben Johnson your favourite of all those that have been picked up?
probably just because of the fit with Caleb Williams, the number 1 overall pick. I think it's a good fit. Their head coach at Chicago, who's now, I've just completely gone blank, is former defensive coordinator for the Colts. Now the defensive coordinator for the Cowboys. He's the former Bears head. It just wasn't a good fit for Matt Eberflus is the name. It just wasn't the right fit for Caleb Williams. And I think Ben Johnson is going to be a guy that can really lean into Ben Johnson's strengths and mold the offense around what Caleb Williams does really well. I also will mention I'm a big fan of the Raiders hiring Pete Carroll. He got a little bit stale towards the latter days of the Seahawks when he was the head coach there, Pete Carroll. But I think he's a calming presence, kind of very similar to Mike McCarthy, a really good head coach. Obviously, he's won Super Bowls. He gives them some upside, but I think he's just a really solid figure with Vegas. There's a lot of sort of moving pieces there. You've got Tom Brady now in the ownership group, and they've had a lot of bad head coaches and quarterbacks over the last couple of years. So they've just had a lot of change. So I think Pete Carroll's just a calming presence. And look, they know they're not going to be an overnight sort of rebuild team, the Raiders, but I think he's someone that over the next 2-3 years can slowly sort of just get things working the right way, get attitudes going the right way, get systems in place that, eventually when he does move on and they hire someone else, that the core is there and the sort of the way that the organization works and runs is going to be a lot better, because it's kind of been a bit of a shit show for a while in Vegas in the Raiders.
He's 74. Do we worry about age as much as we do in sports like the AFL? I mean, you wouldn't have an AFL head coach at 74. Probably wouldn't have too many AFL head coaches at 64. But Pete Carroll is 74. I take it the role's a bit different. I mean, he will obviously delegate a lot of the offensive duty to his offensive coordinator, defensive duties to his defensive coordinator, and the other coaches with specialist roles. So he'll oversee it. So you're not so worried. He's a pretty fit 74, I hear, but 74, 74, Josh, isn't it?
He's probably got the fittest jaw in the NFL, the vigor that he chews gum. But no, you're right. I do worry. 73 is 74, but when the season rolls around, is going to be a very old head coach. But I think it's about putting the people around him. He's got Chip Kelly, former Eagles head coach, in as his offensive coordinator. And look, he didn't work as a head coach, but as an offensive coordinator, he was a fantastic offensive coordinator. So I think that's going to work. And I think just having the support team and the staff that he can assemble is going to help him a lot. I think the pressure is different too. Like, no one's expecting the Raiders to win a Super Bowl, especially when you've got Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert in your division. So it's one of the toughest divisions in the NFL at the moment. So I think just sort of getting the Raiders turning around and trending in an upward direction is kind of the bare expectations for Pete Carroll.
Is it a big jump, excuse my ignorance, from being an offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator and other coordinators to take over the head coaching role?
Yeah, I think it's one of the most underrated aspects is dealing with everything. Like, the head coach has just got a lot of administration on their hands. They've got a lot of media that they need to do and answering questions and speaking to the media. And it's one thing that, to talk about my Indianapolis culture real quick, that our head coach, Shane Steichen, really struggles with the X's and O's he's fine with, play calling is fine with, but he's really struggled as a head coach in dealing with the outside stuff and dealing with the media and the management and saying the right things and saying the wrong things. And he said a lot of the wrong things this year, and it kind of drummed up just bad sort of press. And then you had to walk back comments, and they just handled the Anthony Richardson situation all a little bit funny as well. They benched him, and then they unbenched him, and they said that he was injured, and then he ended up having a back soreness, and then he ended up having a slip disc. It was just all sorts of stuff that they just terribly mismanaged from an administrative perspective. And I think being an offensive coordinator, your job is game plan, focusing on your offense, focusing on your plays. That's it. You don't have to worry about the defense. You don't have meetings with special teams coordinators. You don't have to worry about any of that. You just literally focus on your offense and your offensive game plan.
Josh Wise joined me, NFL expert. The Super Bowl is on next week. It's Philadelphia and Kansas City. Kansas City going for 3 in a row. They did beat Philadelphia in one of those victories, and they've won them both by close margins. The last two that they've won, the other one they won quite comfortably, and they know how to win the close games, as they did, of course, in the conference win in the AFC against the Buffalo Bills last week, and it might have been a bit controversial. We're here for KISS Professional Solutions on Dashing Down Sporting Adventures. You can get hold of KISS, John McEncroe and the crew, 1300 KISS 547777. Just before we get to that, was there a team that surprised you more than most this year? Was there a team that disappointed you more than most?
I think we talked about Washington Commanders before. I think they were easily the surprise of the year. I mean, they're a game away from having a rookie QB in the Super Bowl, which is pretty staggering. And I think the most surprising thing to me is if you watch sort of a lot, they've been nicknamed the Cardiac Commanders because they were in a lot of close games and they were down late. But if you go back and you watch some of those games and you watch the mannerisms and the body language of Jaden Daniels, the dude is a psychopath. He looked calm, laughing, just the poise, and he just has no stress. Like, he just doesn't worry. It's weird to be that young in the NFL and just have no fear whatsoever. And he just, it's kind of weird. It looks like he doesn't care, but obviously he does because he's such a competitor and he's such a baller and he does everything right. But it's just, it's really scary to see just how locked in he can get and just how he has absolutely no fear. There's a lot of Mahomes about him in that he can just walk out down 7, and I think he kind of likes being in that spot, and I think that kind of gets the blood pumping a little bit. It's kind of, what makes athletes a little bit different to the rest of us sitting on the couch is they're kind of just wired a little bit differently.
No stress on the outside, but I'm sure, as they say, he is paddling furiously on the inside. But it's a marvellous thing for the psyche, Josh, isn't it, that you can show that you're so cool, calm and collected on the outside. Doesn't matter what's happening on the inside because we can't see it.
Yeah, exactly. And, whether whether you're right and he's, absolutely fretting it on the inside, it doesn't matter because of the opposing defense on the other side of the ball. He's just seeing this man laughing, smiling, calm, poised, and you just think, how do we rattle this guy? Like, it's a very sort of mature thing to have. And Washington, just with that draft pick, you just have this feeling that the Washington franchise now have changed their sort of fortune for the next decade, because I think they're going to be in pretty much every game because he's got fight to the end. So it's going to be an exciting few years for Washington fans.
And a disappointing team?
I'd probably have to go with the Jacksonville Jaguars because on paper I didn't think their roster was really that awful. They had some good players. I thought Trevor Lawrence is, former number 1 pick and, was touted as one of the best prospects since Andrew Luck and coming out of Clemson. And it's just a weird season. They just looked really clunky and patchy and just all over the place. And, and Doug Peterson rightly fired. And, there's a little bit of hope with Liam Cohen coming there now, and they fired their GM to make sure that they could hire Liam Cohen, which is a messy situation, but maybe that's the final sort of mess that they've had to clean up to kind of get trending in the right direction in an AFC South division that's very winnable next season if they can turn things around. But it was just a really weird season. I thought that would be a fringe sort of playoff team, and I thought they drafted well, and it's just a really weird season. Just couldn't get into any rhythm. They'd look good one game and then they'll just be an absolute disaster the next. So it was really just left a bad taste in your mouth if you're a Jags fan.
Now, of course, the big match, Andy Reid, or the big game, Andy Reid is a superstar coach. Is he one of the greatest we've ever seen? You look at what he did at Philadelphia. He constantly got them to the periphery of the Super Bowl. They got there once and got beaten. They were in a lot of conference finals and couldn't quite get there. He's come to Kansas City and eventually turned that around, and they've just found this innate ability to win all the close games. Why is he so good, Josh? And did it take until his second stint as a head coach for him to reach the level that maybe a lot of people thought he could reach?
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about the one-score games as well. Like the Chiefs are 12-0 in one-score games this season. So I think the big thing for me when I really look at Andy Reid and the one thing is versatility and being adaptable. Being adaptable is the key. I think his ability to bend and mold his offense around his QB and the roster, the things that they do well is probably the best thing that he does in terms of play calling. The one thing that we love about Andy Reid as well is if you give him a couple of weeks to prepare, they have some really great plays and some innovation up their sleeves. So that's one thing he does really well. And we've just seen it, looking even at the Chiefs, we've seen so many variations of this Chiefs offense now. So, they were airing it deep a lot with Tyreek Hill, and then the teams kind of clamped down on that. So they traded Tyreek Hill, and then everyone was like, what? They traded Tyreek Hill. This Chiefs offense is going to be no good now. And then they had a completely different mentality. They're going short. They're running a totally different scheme, and it still worked at an elite level. And then they shut down on that, and they changed their offense again. So his versatility is key, and you only have to look at the QBs that he's coached and what their stats are with Andy Reid as their coach, as opposed to when they leave Andy Reid and they kind of drop off a cliff when Andy Reid's not involved. So he's just a remarkable coach, and I think the thing that sort of just didn't quite get them over the hump in Philly is Donovan McNabb is probably like 60% of what Patrick Mahomes is. So, or 70% of what Patrick Mahomes is. I don't want to be too harsh on poor Donovan McNabb. He was a good quarterback, but I think finding the right QB now to really just get them over the line and tip them over. And it was similar with Belichick finding Brady. It's just a perfect marriage that, without each other, they probably win one or two without each other, but with each other, they can win, 4 or 5, 6. Who knows how long this marriage is going to keep going. And I think the one thing I need to touch on as well is having Spagnuolo as defensive coordinator the last couple of years has really helped. I think Andy Reid doesn't have to focus too much on the defense because Spagnuolo is such a great coordinator and does such a good job. So I think that's made Andy Reid's job a little bit easier in his later years as he gets older and older to be a good coach.
You talked about the quarterbacks. I mean, they are the money men, aren't they? So you can be a very good coach, as you said, Josh.
Yep.
But if you don't have a super quarterback in the big, big games that'll win you championships and then the ultimate, the Super Bowl, you're probably not going to salute, are you?
No, not historically, not statistically. Obviously, there's been some sort of average, mediocre QBs, win a Super Bowl, but they never really win multiple Super Bowls. Like Trent Dilfer hasn't won 3 Super Bowls. He's won 1 Super Bowl. That was a great defense and a great coaching performance, but that's not going to be sustainable for 3 or 4 seasons. You can catch lightning in a bottle here and there, and a good coach can get you over the line for maybe a year, but for sustained success in the NFL, I think you need a minimum sort of top 10 quarterback and, a top 10 coach to form a dynasty. And I think that's what we had with Brady and Belichick, and now we have it with Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. And you look at some of the other great quarterbacks that didn't quite win as many rings. Peyton Manning had a plethora of coaches and couldn't quite find that elite coach to go with him. And same with Aaron Rodgers. He's had a handful of coaches over his career and never really Mike McCarthy was probably his best coach, which is saying something. So it's just hard. You got to find these things in sport where it's a lot of luck and a lot of timing. Things just marry up. And if things were different, Pat Mahomes could have been a Chicago Bear, and we'd be talking about a completely different thing here. And it's just kind of what I love about the NFL, especially with the draft and things, the way that the chips fall and it just changes history. A selection can just change so much in the next 10, 15 years.
Is it the battle of the two quarterbacks here? Mahomes, we know how good he is. Jalen Hurts has been outstanding. We saw how Philadelphia, I mean, you spoke earlier, Josh, about the Commanders, the way they were able to score so heavily against a good team in Detroit Lions. And then the next week they just got spifflicated, didn't they? That how Philadelphia were able to break down their defense. We know how good their defense is, but they just scored points after points after points. We know how good Hurts is as a quarterback. Is it the battle between them, whoever dominates? Is that likely to be the result for you?
It was in the last Super Bowl, but when I looked more and more on the numbers of the last Super Bowl, I actually realized that it actually the story of the underrated story of the Super Bowl, the last Super Bowl, was the Eagles' run defense versus the Chiefs' run offense. So they ran 158 yards, the Chiefs, on the ground at 6 yards a carry, which is pretty staggering. And the Eagles went in as like the number 1 rated defense that year. But when you actually look at their defense overall, their pass rush was so good. Their pass defense was so good that it actually kind of hid how bad their run defense were. They were like 19th in the league in run defense. And that was kind of the story of the game, is the Chiefs were able to control the clock a little bit, ran the ball at will over the Eagles. So I think this is kind of the underrated aspect going into this game is this Eagles defense is a lot better at stopping the run now. They're fifth in the league in stopping the run. They're a more stout unit. Vic Fangio, one of the best defensive coordinators in the NFL, I mentioned before, he has the ability to stop the run, but with minimal bodies in the box. So instead of stacking the box to stop the run, they're able to only have 3 or 4 because they've got an elite defensive line. Jalen Carter, the second-year player, his first-round pick. It's my Smokey for Super Bowl MVP. If he has a big game, I think he can rack up some sacks and really stop the Chiefs' run game. So I think that's an underrated aspect of this game. And you mentioned sort of the Eagles just whipping Washington. Again, this is, a run defense thing. The Eagles ran down Washington and they ran down the throats of the Rams. They were 28th and 23rd in rush defense, both those teams. The Chiefs are 4th in rush defense. So it's going to really come down to, can the Chiefs stop Saquon Barkley? And if they can, then we'll see the QBs battle it out. And Jalen Hurts had probably his best game of his season, actually, against the Rams, which is a good thing because he kind of had an up-and-down season overall. But I do think he had his best game of the season and the right time to have the best game of his season. And then on the other side of the ball, can the Eagles stop this Chiefs running game as well? Because if they can stop the running game and make the Chiefs one-dimensional, then I think the Chiefs secondary, the Eagles secondary, we've got 2 young rookie corners, Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, the 2 rookie QB corners, have a really good chance to really make life difficult. I think Cooper DeJean could really match up well against Travis Kelce, and Quinion Mitchell can do a pretty good job against Xavier Worthy. So, if they can really stop the run, then we'll see how this pass. But they're just a much better defense overall. Even though the numbers don't kind of match up, I think the matchups are way better for the Eagles defense this year compared to back in 2022.
Josh Wise, join me to preview the Super Bowl next week. It should be one of the best we've ever seen. Should be another close one. They always tend to be close when the Kansas City Chiefs are going for 3 in a row. I reckon I've seen the sporting highlight of the year so far, Madison Keys, but some are saying if Kansas City make it 3 in a row in a pretty tight competition in the NFL, that'll be hard to beat as well. And who's to argue with that? But we're here for KISS Professional Solutions for dashing down sporting adventures. You can get KISS, John McEncroe and the team on www.kissps.com.au. They're the largest independent provider of copiers and printers in Victoria. We're the largest small business in Melbourne, Sydney, Gippsland, Shepparton and Albury. They also cater from the Albury office for businesses in Wagga. They offer business phone systems, NBN services, CCTV and security systems. Nick Sirianni, is he underrated? I mean, he got them to a Super Bowl in his first year. It's just his 3rd season of being a head coach. He's done a good job with the Eagles, hasn't he?
He is. I think he is a little bit underrated because he's a very eccentric kind of guy, and he talks a lot of talk, and he gets quite animated on the sideline, and he's had a few run-ins, and he said some dumb things in press conferences from time to time. But I think that kind of has made him sort of a cartoon character figure of a coach to the national media and to fans that aren't really there. And I know there's a lot of Eagles fans that I know that aren't a huge fan of his personality, but I mean, when the writing's on the wall, he is a good coach. He's a good offensive mind. He was the wide receivers coach for the Colts, and he had a really good season for our wide receivers in developing them. Back when we had Phillip Rivers as our QB, and we haven't really had a good season since that season when Sirianni left. So I actually think he's quite an underrated head coach. I know it can get on people's nerves a little bit, but I feel like sometimes it's good to have a few characters in a sport where you've got a lot of people that just always say the right things and do the right things. It's okay to have a bit of a clown sometimes and a bit of a larrikin. So it's not the worst. It's not the worst thing in the world. And I think he's got the Eagles really humming and ready to roar. I think that I think if he can upset Andy Reid, he'll probably go down as a Philadelphia legend because once you win a big game in Philadelphia, you kind of become the cult figure for a long time.
Because they are a big franchise, aren't they? I think people forget that. They're a massive franchise, the Eagles, aren't they?
Yeah, they are, and they're just a big sporting town. They're just full of passionate fans. It's really, really up there. I remember when they won their last Super Bowl and the scenes in the streets and their parade. I remember Jason Kelce dressing up and getting quite passionate and very vocal. Dropped a lot of F-bombs on the radio and repeated some stuff that media had said about the hire of Doug Peterson, and they ranked him as the worst head coach in the league. And Yeah, so I can see very similar scenes here if they do happen to win and especially stop the Chiefs dynasty, which is kind of weird because I think a lot of people aren't outside of Philly aren't really Philly fans because they don't really like Philadelphia fans because they are vocal and they are loud and abrasive. But I think a lot of people are kind of sick and tired of the Chiefs. So, if they kind of might be the people's team on Monday, I think there might be a lot of neutrals actually going for the Eagles.
And like our podcast, I'm sure that if Philadelphia gets up, the Heights podcast that the Kelsey boys do, Travis, of course, who's playing for Philadelphia, who's with Taylor Swift, and Jason, his wife Kylie's got her own podcast as well. It just jumped up on my feed recently, and I've been very interested in them, Josh. They've just had their fourth daughter. It'll be fascinating listening, and they've got lots of hits already. I'm sure it'll just go through the roof.
I would. Massive fan of New Heights, and I love the Kelsey brothers personally as well, and the Kelsey documentary on Amazon. Just watching him and what his body went through. My wife, who does not like sport whatsoever, which is a real pain point, Dan. But
my ex didn't either. Did not like it at all, and that's fine. You find other things to talk about, Josh.
Yeah, but she watched the documentary with me, and she actually really enjoyed it as well. And she's a big Kylie Kelsey fan now too. So, the Kelsey family is kind of bridging some more neutral fans into the game, which isn't a bad thing. And I think Taylor Swift is as well a little bit, which I kind of think is leaning into the narrative that people are getting their tinfoil hats out a little bit here and there, and saying that the Chiefs are getting the right calls and things are going perfect for them because the NFL wants Taylor Swift at the Super Bowl, which I find a little bit crazy, but people will believe what they want to believe.
Just on that, did they get the rub of the green in that controversial call that I think Bills fans are still bleating about when they lost narrowly? Now, of course, it resulted in a touchdown. It wasn't at the very end of the game, but it resulted in a touchdown for the particular decision that the ref gave in the way of the Chiefs. It resulted in a touchdown for them, which obviously flipped the score, that it might have gone the other way if the decision had have been in favour of the Bills. They could have got a touchdown. It could have changed the result, but of course it was reasonably early on, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was still about 12 and a half minutes left. So look, I don't think it robbed the game. I don't think it changed the outcome of the game because the Bills still had plenty of opportunity and plenty of chances to level or win that game with 12 minutes to go. I don't know if they were necessarily robbed. I think the Bills were kind of on the stiff side of two sort of 50-50 calls. When you look at the camera angle in the video, it's very touch and go. There's a still sort of photo that's from an angle that people think's definitive. It's hard for me to say you can overturn that. And when the referee makes a call, they're never really going to overturn their own call because then they're admitting that they've made a mistake. So it's a 50-50 call. But we see that all the time with play the ball errors in NRL, and some are knock-ons and then others are penalties. And we see it in cricket with umpire decisions and should you walk, should you not walk, 50-50 stuff. It's kind of the worst parts of sport. And I think overall, statistically, that they're not getting that many more calls than any other team. I just think because they're one of the most popular teams and they're always in prime time, I think there's just more of a magnifying glass on it. And I say this because I probably thought the same back in the day with the Patriots getting the rub of the green all the time. But I think in hindsight, it's probably around the same when you spread it out over the course of seasons or careers, the calls that you get. But it's just, I think you're under the microscope a little bit more. So, but it feeds into the narrative, and if it gets more eyes on the game that people want to see that sort of stuff, then I think leaning into it's not the worst thing to do from teams. But I'm sure that the Chiefs are just blacking out the noise around all of that.
I think the same was attributed to the Cowboys when they won 3 and 4 years with the great Troy Aikman, Michael Irwin, etc. They're an outstanding team, but I think everyone thought that the refs might have looked after them as well during that golden period that they had. Have we given the Bills enough credit? That was a mighty season, wasn't it?
It was a mighty season, and it's a really bitter pill to swallow because they are 4-0 against the Chiefs in the regular season, and then they're 0-4 against the Chiefs in the playoffs, which, if you just split that down the middle and you have 2 wins and 2 losses, I think you could call it even, and the Bills fans would be a lot happier. They might have a Super Bowl or 2, but unfortunately, it's the games that matter that they just fall short. And it's kind of a strange one because the Bills didn't play that great. I thought they started really rough, and they definitely played them a lot better in the regular season. But that's kind of what the Chiefs do, and kind of what Andy Reid does is I think they don't really get out their great plays. I think they're so good and they're so confident in their ability to win games that I think they kind of cruise a little bit in the regular season, and then they kind of throw that playbook in the bin and they get out the playoffs playbook, and that's what we saw. And they scored the first time all season was 32 points. The Chiefs, they hadn't scored 30 all year, and they scored 32 against the Bills in the AFC Championship game. So what can you say? They're just a champion team, and their ability, I guess, is just being chameleons. They just change their color and can absorb so much. And yeah, they're really hard to kind of beat. So that's what's going to make this game really interesting, because I think if Philly can learn from what the Bills have done in their recent losses, then they might be able to find that chink in the Chiefs' armor, I guess.
Imagine if the Bills had played, as you say, Josh, a bit better. They only lost by 3 points. They'd probably win the game. I mean, they can certainly take a lot out of it, can't they?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the Bills' best is probably, like this year, the Bills' best is probably better than the Chiefs' best. If you look at it on paper and what they can do, I think the Bills, if they played at their best, could beat the Chiefs at their best. But the Chiefs just need to be a little bit better than their opponent on the day, and that's just what they do. Is they don't need to be their best. They just need to be their best at their day and hope that the other team isn't. So it's crazy with the Chiefs. Like, the statistics kind of don't really add up. Like they're only plus 59 in point differentials. Like they'll be the fifth lowest Super Bowl point differential of all time if they win the Super Bowl. So they're not sort of beating teams and smashing teams, but they just get the job done.
A win's a win. Couple of narratives. Now, the AFL, we're big on that. Talking about retribution for Nick Sirianni losing narrowly in 2021. Will that be spoken much about over the next week or so on Media Street in the lead up to the Super Bowl, knowing that he had an opportunity 2 years ago and it just slipped through his fingers? And it's a long time, but Andy Reid was at Philadelphia, his old team. How keen would he be to beat them again? Or he's beaten them once and that's old news?
I think it's probably old news for Andy. I think it would have been a very emotional time the first time, and there was a lot of emotion in that matchup because obviously you had Travis and Jason both playing in the game, and they were brothers, and there was a lot of connections between the two teams, and even the management, and there's some sort of front office people that have previously been at Philly, now in Kansas City, and things like that. So definitely think for Andy it's probably still a bit bittersweet, because I know he has a lot of love for Philly and a lot of love for the team and a lot of the players over there. And for Sirianni, I think the one thing to consider is that the last time, so the Philadelphia Eagles lost to the Patriots back in the day by 3 points in the Super Bowl, and the next time they played the Patriots in the Super Bowl, they won. So the last time they played the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, they lost by 3. Correct. So the narrative might be here is that this is the chance that they can win again. So I think that's something Sirianni probably might be hammering on a little bit, and I think for a lot of those players as well, that was the first time for them to be in the Super Bowl. I think that's one thing to bear in mind and to consider is there's a lot of things in the Super Bowl preparation over this week with Media Day and NFL honors and all the media attention and things that you've got to do that the Chiefs are they're used to now. They've been in 6 Super Bowls. Like they're fine. They're good. Whereas the Eagles, the first time it was all foreign to a lot of them. So this is going to be a lot of calmer heads now. Jalen Hurts has been there before. AJ Brown's been there before. Sirianni and the coaching staff are now all been there. So I think that's going to be a big thing to help them sort of calm their nerves and they'll be ready to play.
New Orleans is the venue. Happy with that? I mean, at the end of the day, it was chosen. We have to be happy with it, don't we?
Yeah, I think it's a great city. Obviously, the last Super Bowl there, we had the power outage for 24 minutes, and that was an interesting sort of thing that happened. But I think we'll be fine. It is a good city, good weather city. The Superdome's a great venue. So yeah, I think it's now the record for most Super Bowls it's hosted. I think it's 7 now in the Superdome. So the Cowboys have won a Super Bowl there. I'm sure you're a happy man around that time. But I think it's a good city for a Super Bowl. I prefer sort of the South where there's not too much weather involved, because I think for neutral fans, you want to see, scoring and a tight game. And I think that's the one thing with the Chiefs that you come to expect is they're always tight games. So at least we're going to get that.
Although being an Aussie, and I know it wouldn't be great for those that are there and those that are playing, I love watching the NFL when the snow's coming down. I know it's tough conditions for them out there and almost impossible, but I just find that unbelievable that they're able to get through it.
Yeah, I mean, the Philly Rams game in the playoffs this year was had some beautiful snow, and that was a crazy week from the Rams because just a week prior they had to flee their city because of fires, and then they're playing a week later in heavy snow. It's pretty wild set of circumstances. But one of the favorite games of the year for me to watch in the regular season was the Browns against the Steelers, and you just watched the Ohio snow roll in this game, and Jameis Winston led his team through the snow in an upset win over the Steelers, and it was just actually beautiful to watch because the snow just got thicker and thicker, and it was just and the uniforms looked great. The yellow was popping in the yellow and the black jerseys, and they had the orange helmets in the snow. It was actually it was stunning to watch.
Why have New Orleans had 7? Is it just something about the venue that attracts the powers that be that they like?
I'm not sure. I think it's just a great sort of party city. I guess it's a venue that's hosted major events. They've had multiple national championships, and it's been a stadium now that's been renovated and fixed up. And I'm not really sure what the process is involved. Obviously, the team's bid, but I guess when you've hosted it successfully in the past, then that kind of lends itself to less risk taking from the NFL, and that they know that New Orleans will be able to put on a show.
Now, I've been looking, maybe I haven't been looking in the right spot, so excuse my ignorance. What do you know about the halftime entertainment, which sometimes, which I think is a bit unfair, is almost a bigger ticket item, and it provides or creates more publicity than the game itself, the halftime entertainment, which is always huge, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's massive, and I'm a bit of a fan of the halftime show. I like it. I like the buzz around it. I like that it gets the neutrals in, and it's part of the event. It's part of what's become sort of synonymous with the Super Bowl. Is the halftime show, is the Gatorade bath. It's the anthem. People timing how long an anthem takes, all that sort of stuff. It's all part of the fun on the day, and I think my favorite Super Bowl. Obviously, I'm going to be biased. Was the Colts winning, and we had Prince as the halftime show. Just an unbelievable combo to see Peyton Manning hoist the Lombardi and then Prince play Purple Rain in the rain. So that's kind of an iconic sort of pop culture moment. And I think Kendrick Lamar this year, whether you like rap music or not, he's an entertainer and he'll put on a show. He's very into theatrics and understands his audience. I think he's a guy that is quite he's a genius, I think. So I think that's going to be something that will be fun and worth watching.
Before I get your selection, Josh, I really appreciate your time on Dashing Dan's Sporting Adventures. Josh Wise joined me, NFL expert, to talk about the Super Bowl, the big match between Philadelphia and the Kansas City Chiefs. Late Monday morning, Australian time next week, or Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time next week. We cannot wait for it. And of course, if you're lucky enough to a big company in America, Josh, just on a diversionary tactic or a diversionary topic, if you are lucky enough to have an ad on the coverage, it costs you a fortune, but it's all worth it, isn't it?
It is. It's the one thing that we don't get here in our coverage is, unfortunately, we don't really get to see the American ads and all the sort of the movie trailers and all the different bits and pieces that go into the Super Bowl ads. I think that's the one thing that we miss. It'd be really cool if there was a way that we could do that, but I understand that advertisers and things down here want to capitalize on the viewership, and obviously Channel 7 getting the rights, that's important for their advertisement revenue as well. And but it would be nice to see. So unfortunately, we have to just stick to YouTube or seeing them on social media. But it costs a pretty penny, and I'd love to go to a Super Bowl one day, but again, that costs a pretty penny as well.
Well, I'm sure with your love of it, you'll get there one day, and I hope you do, because it's been great having a chat to you about it. Indianapolis Colts, your beloved Colts. What's wrong, and can they rise out of the ashes? even as soon as next year?
I think ultimately it doesn't really matter because I think we talked about the Chiefs, we talked about Mahomes. Until either Mahomes retires or Andy Reid retires, it's going to be mighty hard to make a Super Bowl in the next 5 to 10 years. So for me, I'm holding out hope for. We saw Peyton Manning's youngest son throw the football this morning at the Pro Bowl. I might just wait 7 or 8 years until he's eligible. But otherwise, his nephew Arch Manning is a QB in Texas at the moment for the Texas Longhorns, and he could be a highly touted prospect in either next year or the year after. So I'm holding out hope that we get the Manning name back in Indy, and we'll see where we go from there.
Well, we spoke earlier, didn't we? And we're here for professional solutions on Dashing Dan's Sporting Adventures, KISS Professional Solutions, www.kissps.com.au. John McEncrow and the crew based in Carrum Downs in Melbourne, in the southeastern suburbs. We spoke before about Pete Carroll going back as a head coach at the age of 74. Andy Reid is 66. How many more years? As long as he wants?
Yeah, it's funny. There's been some retirement talk about Andy Reid. There was after the last Super Bowl win. I think that's just media fodder, I guess. You always ask the question after you win a Super Bowl, you win a championship. There was some Travis Kelce murmurs as well last year. I honestly think Travis Kelce's probably closer to retirement than Andy Reid, just because Kelce has slowed down a little bit this season, and obviously he's got a lot going on outside of the gridiron. So we'll see what happens there. I'm not sure with Andy Reid. He's such a lovable figure, and he's such a happy-go-lucky man that he looks like he's having the time of his life. But you know that there's a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of hours and a lot of hard work put into what he does, and he doesn't just become a fantastic head coach overnight from putting in no work whatsoever. So honestly, I think it's a 50-50 call, but I could probably see maybe 1 or 2 years. Potentially, maybe the three-peat is where he wants to draw the line. But if they lose, he might be more hungry to come back. But it's a tough call. I honestly don't know. I think maybe 1 or 2 years at least before he retires, though, if I had to make a call on it.
It's funny, though, but if he gets the three-peat, he might be thinking, who's done the four-peat? I want to do the four-peat. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
When you've had success, it's intoxicating, isn't it? You just want to have more.
Yeah, exactly. And Tom Brady speaks about that a lot. Like he always gets asked what's his favorite ring, and he always used to say his next one. So, yes. I think that's kind of the same with Pat and with Andy. So, that combo. Like if you're gonna, it'd be crazy to retire when you've got a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes in his prime of his career like that. But again, we don't know what's going on outside of the football and private life and personal life and wanting to spend time with family and things like that. You'll never knock someone that wants to do that. So, but I'd love for him to stick around because he's one of the great coaches and just great human beings in the world of the NFL.
And Josh, before I let you go, I'll put your head on the chopping block. I mean this in a nice way. Who wins and why?
I'm going with the upset. I think the Philadelphia Eagles can win the game. I actually think they're the better team overall on paper when you look at them. Very strong offensive line, although they are a little bit injured in the middle, and that's a sore spot for someone like Chris Jones, who's an amazing defensive player for the Chiefs. But I do think the Eagles, with the 2 weeks rest, will be right. And their defensive line I've touched on, and the emergence of their rookie corners. I just think overall their players and chess pieces on defense are amazing. I am a little bit concerned Mahomes. I think he's like 8-0 against Vic Fangio as either a head coach or coordinator, which is pretty crazy, but I don't think Fangio's had a team this loaded. So I actually think the Eagles can get the job done and get over the line and avenge their Super Bowl loss and hoist the Lombardi. I think they can, and it'll come down to Saquon Barkley and Australian Jordan Mailata. I think the sort of the underrated storyline in this Saquon Barkley story, he's I think 30 yards away from having the most yards in a season, including like regular season and playoffs of all time. So Saquon Barkley's going to get there. He's going to have the record for the most rushing yards ever in a season, including the playoffs. And he's had 7 touchdowns of runs of 60 yards or more this season, which is an NFL record as well. But I think the underrated aspect in all of that is this offensive line and the holes that they're able to make. And there's a viral clip going around of Jordan Mailata in that run where Saquon scored on the first play against the Commanders, and he bulldozed two guys at the same time and his own player in AJ Brown. So three guys, and Mailata bulldozed them all, and he continues to run down the field at steaming pace. And I think he's the first one to get Saquon Barkley in the end zone to celebrate with him. So he's an extraordinarily great player. I think it's very underrated. I don't think many people realize how good Jordan Mailata is. He's an unbelievable story to go from where he was in playing rugby league in Souths to being probably one of the best three players in the world at his position. And given it's a completely different game and his athleticism is off the charts, it's a massive success story, and I'd love for him to win a Super Bowl. I think he deserves it. And for him to hit a key block, a crucial block, and send Saquon Barkley into the end zone is what I hope for on the day. But at the same time, I wouldn't mind seeing a Chiefs three-peat. I like Patrick Mahomes. I think he's the greatest QB of all time. I think when he retires, I think he's better than Tom Brady. Maybe I'm biased. As a Colts fan, I always thought Peyton Manning was better than Tom Brady.
Yeah,
but
fair enough.
But I do think Mahomes is better than all of them. I just think he's just an unbelievable quarterback. I think when it's all said and done, he'll probably end up going down as the GOAT. So winning three in a row would probably help him get that step to securing that and more people being around that narrative. But I think at the end of the day, I'm just looking forward to a really close game. But I do think the Eagles will win. I mentioned Jalen Carter as my dark horse Super Bowl MVP, but I think Saquon Barkley is probably the MVP bet. I think if the Eagles are going to win the game, it's because he's going to be able to run and be the key cog in making this offense work. So, yeah, I think Eagles. Let's go 31-24.
It'll be very close. Just one more quick one. Just on that, if the Eagles get a lot of points early, does that put Kansas on the back foot, or Andy Reid won't panic because he knows they've come back from big deficits before? He'll just continue to do what they're doing, and he might make plays, not so much make plays up on the run, but bring in plays that they've worked on the run to come up with a way of getting back into the games that you're expecting?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because the Eagles are really built to play with a lead. Like they're just such a good team to play with a lead. So if they do get into a double-digit lead, you can just play really tough defense. And the way that they play defense is, especially if they're putting the Chiefs in passing down situations, they're going to be able to blitz. Zach Bourne, who's a Defensive Player of the Year candidate nominee for Defensive Player of the Year. I haven't even mentioned him as well. He's a linebacker that they acquired this year, an unreal player off the edge. He'll be able to get in Mahomes' face, and obviously Jalen Carter up the middle. So if they can get him into passing down situations and eliminate the run altogether by getting out to a lead, there's a chance. But also at the same time, we've seen it time and time again, including, two games against the 49ers where the Chiefs have been down double digits in the fourth quarter and won Super Bowls. But I do think the Eagles are a way better built team to win with the lead than the 49ers ever were. So I think with that rushing team and that rushing ability and their defense, if they can get out to a lead, it's gonna go really nicely. But yeah, again, Mahomes is such a good quarterback throwing the ball late. It's hard, but I do think, if they can get to the lead and that narrative and that game script works, then I can see Philly running away with it.
We can't wait. It should be one of the best Super Bowls we've seen. We say it every year. Two outstanding sides. Philadelphia tasting defeat just 3 times this year. 2 losses for Kansas City, going for 3 in a row under the great Andy Reid. Josh, I really appreciate your time. Josh Nye has been my guest, NFL expert. Great to catch up with him. And we're here for Dashing Dan Sporting Adventures and KISS Professional Solutions. 1300 KISS PS 547777 is their phone number. And their website is www.kissps.com.au. They're the largest independent provider of copiers and printers in Victoria. We're the largest small business in Melbourne, Sydney, Gippsland, Shepparton and Albury. And their Albury office is able to cater for businesses in Wagga. They offer business phone systems, NBN services, CCTV and security systems. As I said, they're based in Carrum Downs. They take pride in going the extra mile for their customers, aiming to retain them for life. Whatever your office technology needs may be, we're here to provide sound advice, competitive pricing, and unparalleled customer support. Where do you watch it? At home, or do you go to a pub in Melbourne, Josh, that is obviously in favour of having the NFL on from late morning?
I'm actually based up in Sydney.
Are you? Right.
Yeah, I am. So, but I'll be from home. I work from home as well, so I'll probably put it up on the big screen at home and move the desk into the lounge room and just get comfortable and watch it. But I've been known to frequent a couple of events in Sydney from time to time. We've had a couple of events at Luna Park, the Luna Bowl, which back in the day our podcast was presented for, and we held a big party at Luna Park, and we had a sort of tailgate party on the harbour as well. So that was good fun back in the years. But with the kids at home now, it's a bit harder to get out in the house on a Monday morning. So unfortunately, it'll be a bit at home.
Good on you. We'll enjoy it. I really appreciate your time. We might maybe try and catch up and get your view after the Super Bowl. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dan.